Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. This 30-minute podcast features a new author interviewed by me every single day, 365 days a year, for about 30 minutes. I am also the publisher for Zibby Books, which publishes 12 books a year in fiction and memoir. Our books are already out now. You can check it out on zibbybooks.com. And we have a magazine called Zibby Mag, where we have lots of wonderful essays and lifestyle features. That's at zibbymag.com. We have classes at zibbyclasses.com. And I recently opened a bookstore in LA called Zibby's Bookshop at 1113 Montana Avenue at 11th Street in Santa Monica. I hope that you are able to enjoy some of our other offerings. But this here podcast is the basis of all of it and started in 2018. And no matter what I do, this is basically my favorite thing. Enjoy. Lisa C. is the author of Lady Tan's Circle of Women. Lisa is the New York Times bestselling author of The Island of Sea Women, The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, Snowflower and the Secret Fan, which I loved, Peony and Love, Shanghai Girls, China Dolls, and Dreams of Joy, which debuted at number 1. She is also the author of On Gold Mountain, which tells the story of her Chinese-American family's settlement in Los Angeles. She was the recipient of the Golden Spike Award from the Chinese Historical Association of Southern California and the History Makers Award from the Chinese American Museum. She was also named National Woman of the Year by the Organization of Chinese American Women. Welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss your latest novel, Lady Tan's Circle of Women. Beautiful, beautiful cover, beautiful book.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just really delighted to have a chance to talk to you.
Oh, you too. I've been a fan since Snowflower and the Secret Fan. You must get tired of having everybody say that to you. So
Never.
I'm sorry. Sorry to
Never get tired of it.
Jump on the bandwagon, but was so excited when this novel came out and everything. So let's start by you telling listeners a little bit about what Lady Tan's Circle of Women is about. And congratulations, by the way, on it being a Sarah Selects title. I really loved that book club as well. So.
Oh, that's great. So it's based on a true story of a woman doctor in the Ming Dynasty. So 500 years ago, right there was really amazing to me that such a woman would even exist and be practicing medicine. But what was amazing about her is that in 1511, when she turned 50, she published a book of her medical cases, and all of her cases were women and girls. And so this is actually the first time that I've written a novel that is actually about someone, as opposed to, Snowflower and the Secret Fan, where it has the secret writing as the historic backdrop, where it's more of a general idea of a historic backdrop, Island of Sea Women, the diving women of Jeju Island. So this, was really inspired by her. She was a remarkable woman in her time. I think she would be considered remarkable even today. One reason that her book is still in print 500 years later, we should all be so lucky, is that many of her remedies are still used in traditional Chinese medicine today.
Amazing. And it was so interesting to see, even to get the frame of view of what they were doing medically and how things like leeches were just so common, and like just how you set the stage. No?
Actually, they didn't use leeches. I think I used that as a comparison, is that, so many people don't really know about traditional Chinese medicine. But if you're reading it and think, oh, this seems backward, if you think where we were, the West was in terms of medicine at that time, it really was things like leeches and sawing people's arms off with no anesthesia and stuff like that. So they were really far more advanced in how they were looking at medicine than we were here in the West.
Sorry, I mixed that up.
That's okay. It's early. It's early in the morning.
Thank you. Well, tell me where this idea came from. And I know this was a pandemic. I read this was a pandemic book of yours, and something on the bookshelf caught your eye. Tell me the story behind the whole thing.
Yeah. So I had thought I knew what the next book was going to be. I'd been quietly doing research on it. And then when the pandemic hit, I couldn't do that book because it was going to require a trip deep into a very, very remote part of China. No way I could have done that in 2020. And even now, I'd be a little reluctant to go anywhere that remote in the world. I mean, this for this particular book. It was just a very, very remote part of China. Anyway, I then spent the next few months of the pandemic moping around. My life is over. I can't do the thing I like to do. Because also all of the research libraries, all of the archives, everything was closed. So, not only could I not go to where I write about, I couldn't do research on where I write about. Anyway, it wasn't until October of 2020. So you can see I spent quite a few months just at loose ends, like all of us, or many of us. And there was a day I was just walking right here. And you can't see this, but these are my research books, and there are another 3 bags of them. And the spine of one of them kind of jumped out at me. I really don't know. I feel like this must have been fate or destiny or something, that it just, all of a sudden out of that shelf popped out. And it was a light gray jacket with slightly darker gray lettering. No reason for it to jump out, but it did. And I pulled it down, Reproducing Women, Pregnancy, and Childbirth in the Ming Dynasty. I had had that book on my shelf for 10 years and had never opened it. And I thought, oh, well, here we are in the middle of a pandemic. My life is over. I might as well sit down and start reading right now, which I did. I sat down right over there. And on page 19, there was a mention of Tanyan Shen. And I looked her, I just thought, this is so amazing. I came to the computer, I looked her up, and within 26 hours, I knew that I was going to be writing about her. And that was so completely different than any other book that I've written. Usually I think about something, for 5, 10, 15, even 20 years. Tea-Girl of Hummingbird Lane. I had that idea in my head for 20 years before I finally found my way into that story. So this was completely different. And then the research was completely different because, again, I couldn't go to China to do the research. I couldn't go to any of the research libraries. So all of the research was done in a completely different way, new way for me.
So mostly online, I'm assuming, lots of
Well, there
books.
was some stuff that was online. There were certain books that I was looking for that ordinarily I might be able to get them from one of the research libraries at UCLA, but I couldn't. So I actually set aside some money that I thought, well, this is the money I would have spent going to China, on the airfare and hotel and food. And so I used that to buy books that I couldn't get otherwise. And some of these were pretty rare. So more than one usually spends on a book, but I felt like I had to do that. But the main thing was that I reached out to different scholars, and ordinarily I just read their work. But this time I just felt like I really needed to talk to people. And these scholars, around the country, but also around the world, were unbelievably helpful to me and so giving of their time. There was one professor at Harvard who, in this field, he's kind of the god of Chinese studies, and he just talked to me, many, many times. And it was only recently that I had the thought that, maybe they were feeling as at loose ends as I was, that they couldn't do the thing that they do. And that here I was, sending them a note saying, would you talk to me about how would you send a letter in the Ming Dynasty? That I couldn't find that. Or how long would it take to travel from here to there in 1496? These very, very specific things. But there are people out there who have, spent years doing research on things like that.
The funny thing is, nobody would be able to notice if you were wrong. Let's say you said it was 2 weeks instead of a week to get from point A to point B. It's not like the average reader would be able to say something, but clearly you are just dead set on having it all be just right, which is amazing.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, that is true. And this is the novel that takes place the furthest back in time of any of my books. And so that's great because people don't know, but I would know.
Yeah.
And it's really important for me to get those facts correct. But I also find that some of that stuff is just really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And that because how we live today, and even if we said 100 years ago or 200 years ago, we have a sense of, how people lived 100 years ago. We've all read The Great Gatsby. We've seen movies that take place in the 20s. We could imagine what it's like to be a pioneer in this country, because we've all read Laura Ingalls Wilder. We can imagine Elizabethan England because we've all, read or seen something written by Shakespeare. So we kind of have a sense of how their lives worked and what their clothes looked like. But to really think about that then, and, that's a long time ago, and just certain basic things that then when you get to them and you think, oh, to me, I find it fascinating.
So what were some of the things?
I don't know if other people will, but I find it fascinating
No,
just
of
to
course,
see how people live their lives and how they got from here to there, and what were the issues and what were the concerns, and how did you get around certain kinds of things, and even just, making a cup of tea. That you're not just turning on the gas. There's something more behind it.
Well, I think anyone who's interested in sort of human emotions and human behavior and wants to put themselves in someone else's shoes, you have to know what the shoes feel like. Like exactly. the binding of the shoes here and how much pain people are in. And you need the context to get to the emotional truth sometimes.
Exactly. And, women in those days, especially elite women. So she was a doctor. So she was, married to into an elite family as well. That women in those days in that class you would think on some level that their lives were better, but in many ways their lives were so constricted, that they weren't allowed out into the world. And so everything just revolved around these women's rooms, where there you were every day, day after day, with all of your husband's relatives and your sisters-in-law and the aunties and the concubines and the second and third wives and all of these people who may not have had your best interest at heart. But the novel is called Lady Tan's Circle of Women. That circle of women part seemed really important to me. And I think during the pandemic, I really, because I felt isolated, I think we all felt isolated, and it took us time to figure out things like Zoom, where at least we could, see each other a little bit, and how important that connection is to us, whether it's now or it was, 500 years ago or 500 years from today, that we need to make those connections. And it's not just the one-on-one, it is those circles of people who help us, who support us, who love us, who allow us to do the things that we love to do or see us through terrible times. And that those circles can shift in our lives, I think, over time. And sometimes we don't even recognize when we have them. And I just think, especially during those long months of isolation, that I personally really thought a lot about friendship and what that has meant to me in my own life, and how it gives women such comfort, but also fortitude.
Tell me about your own circle of women. Tell me about your good friend. Like, who is your circle now and how has that shifted? Like, do you still have friends from college? Like, where are your friends from now? What is your structure?
Well, unfortunately, most of my friends live in other places. So, I have one of my oldest friends is in Dallas now. Another one is up in Santa Barbara. So they're further away. But I think that also has meant that the time that we're together is all the more important. And I'm sure you've had this experience of people who have known you the longest. It's like you see each other and it's like instantly stripped away all of the stuff of who we are in the world, and you're right back to being in the 7th grade. Yes. That you know each other in this very pure way before you became the person you became, and that you can connect on that level right away. And I think that this is something pretty common with people, especially if it's a really old relationship. It's like we have that phrase, they knew me when, or I knew her when. But I think it's that when part, that it's stripped away of all of the things that we've added on to our lives. Oh, I became a mother. Oh, I became a writer. Oh, I play tennis and I like to hike. All of those things that start to identify us. But once you get all of that off of you, then you're at your core person. And I think that that's where a really great friend sees through that to the core of who you are. The other thing about friendship, and I'm sure you have experienced this yourself, is that it is unlike any other relationship that we have in our lives. We will tell a friend something that we wouldn't tell, our mother, our husband, a boyfriend, a lover, our children. It's a very, very particular kind of intimacy. And of course, whenever you have your heart open like that, you are vulnerable to being hurt. So I think it's fair to say that in my novels that I do come back to friendship a lot. And it's for the reasons we've been talking about, that it's that love, it's that support, it's the people who give you the strength to keep going forward in often very difficult circumstances. But there is that dark shadow side, or the potential for those dark shadows. And it's like, wherever I see those dark shadows, that's where I want to go.
So interesting. I feel like with friendships, it's so easy to say, well, I'm not going to make time. I can't do that. I have to focus on this, or I have to focus on my family or my work or this, that. Like, of course I would love to see my girlfriends, but that's hard
Right.
it's hard to justify that time, when in fact, that is the time that sustains you and enables you to do all the rest of the stuff.
Yeah. And sometimes just even being able to go for a walk, with a friend, and you're grabbing time, trying to grab this moment just so that you can connect in this very special way. And it gives us, it fuels us, it gives us so much. And like I said, it's just a unique relationship that we have in our lives.
So true.
And I think very different than male friendship. It's just very intimate, and it does so much follow the path of women's lives, how it changes and evolves depending on where we are in our lives, and when we're teenagers, or when we're, in kindergarten, or when we first have kids. And actually, some of my closest friends now are from my older son's kindergarten class. Because we all came together at this moment. And then it was like, okay, we're all going to go out trick-or-treating together. And let's all go do this together. And that it was about the kids, but over time, it really became about the parents and about the moms, especially.
True. I have a great group from my twins' preschool class. It was like a great class. We still get together for breakfast and this and that. And I know at any moment I could text any one of them and say, and actually one of our core in that whole group ended up passing away. She had ovarian cancer. And it was one of the most painful losses, because it's not like she and I talked on the phone every single day, but we were all like this interlocked web, and one piece fell off. And so I don't know, these nets are what catch us through the hardest times. So I totally get it. Tell me more, back to the book. Tell me more about how you went about writing. You did all this research. How did you synthesize all the information and then pivot to the writing time versus the researching time? And how do you get into that? How do you stay super creative and tapped into a character while integrating all of the different facts? And how long did that whole thing take, and how many hours a day were you at it, and all of that?
Yes, so a book typically takes about 2 years. The majority of time is the research. The writing is actually the least amount of time, and then the editing is somewhere in the middle. When I'm when I'm doing research, I love it so much. To me, it's like a big treasure hunt. I never know what I'm going to find, and I can spend hours and hours and hours every day. But when I'm writing, I write 1,000 words a day, which is just 4 pages. It's not very much, but I keep a notebook where I keep track of how many words I've written in a day. And sometimes I'm at 997, and I have to stay here until I get that final bit, because I have to do the 1,000. And so sometimes I can do that in about 2 hours. Sometimes it takes me 8. I know if it's 8, it's probably not very good, but I will stay here until I get it done. And then with editing, I find that to be exhausting. I really do. That's the most exhausting for me. And when I first start, the first draft is just awful. I think most writers will say that. And so if I can do 10 pages in a day, I feel like I've really accomplished something. But then by the end, several drafts in, I'm up at like 40, 50 pages a day. So it's just a long process. But for me, that's where I really shape the novel. I do write from the beginning to the end, straight through. You talk to a lot of writers, there's no one way or a right way. Some people make the first sentence perfect and the first paragraph perfect and the first page perfect. I just go all the way to the end. And then I shape it as I'm writing. The one thing I would say about that, there was some part of one of your questions, now I forgot it, that I thought, I had an interesting answer, but now I can't remember.
Synthesizing research.
Oh, yes. So, yes, that was it. So I know when I'm ready to write when the last line comes to me. I write the last line first. And once I have that last line, then I know where I'm going, and bad things happen in my books. I can't deny it. But when I know that what the ending is, it's like the emotional place that I want to end. That's, to me, the light at the end of the tunnel. And so whatever is happening as I'm writing, I know that I'm writing towards that. And then the other thing I would say about the research is I do it all myself. I never know what I'm going to find. I look at it like it's a huge treasure hunt. I'm just so excited. Like, what am I going to find? And then I do find things, and there are moments where I'll find something and I'll just think, ooh, I've got to use that. And so in this book, I don't think it gives too much away to say that the scene with the worm, when there's something written on the baby's foot, and something that happens in front of the Empress, all 3 of those happened to real women. And when I read those stories of what had happened to those particular real women, I was just like, oh, yeah. Come on down, worm. It's like, it triggers my imagination, but it's also like, I've just gotta have that. So those things also inspire me along the way of something that I know that I want to use. But it comes out of the research. Like, I could not have made up that worm just from nowhere.
As you got your career underway and as it continues to go, who have been some of the most influential people? Either like a first teacher who was supportive, or somebody who helped you navigate being a best-selling author for the first time, or who are some of the people that stand out to you?
Well, my 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Bruin Slot, and she loved history. And this was when you learn American history. And she really felt that history was about real people. And she would have us do all kinds of plays, actually. And I have red hair, people who are just listening and can't see. And so I always got to be Thomas Jefferson. I know a lot about Thomas Jefferson, but that her feeling was that if you could stand in their shoes, that then you could understand what they were doing. And of course, that idea, and you touched on it earlier too, that's what I want to do, is just be in their shoes, be in their clothes, and try to understand in the moment, like being in the room with those people, the people that I'm writing about. That's the goal for me. The other person who would have to be much bigger than Mrs. Bruin Slot would be my mother, and Carolyn C. My mother was a writer, and her father was a writer as well. So I feel in many ways like I had a lifelong apprenticeship. Sometimes I joke around, well, it's a good thing they weren't plumbers, but why couldn't they have been brain surgeons? But when I was doing research for something, my mother's papers are at UCLA Special Collections, and I was looking through some of the old correspondence. And when she was in college, her father wrote her a letter saying, if you want to be a writer, you need to write 1,000 words a day.
Wow.
And of course, he wrote that to her when she was something like 20. It was something that my mother always said to me. It was something that she taught in her classes. And so I think just the discipline, but also how you would think about editing and publishing. My mother, she's gone now, but she was writing and publishing novels, but also doing magazine work in the 1960s. And if you think about it, there just really weren't that many women writers who were journalists or who were writing fiction. And if there were some, they were mostly in New York. My mom was here in Los Angeles. And so there are many people who look at her as sort of the godmother of West Coast letters. She supported so many writers and influenced so many younger writers all the way to today. I get emails or, I'll run into someone who will say, your mother meant so much to me. And she's the one who helped me get published. And she was their teacher. She was my mom. And the fact that I had watched her go through this process, and people were mean to her, could be very mean to her. And I can remember just sometimes she'd be on the couch on the phone with an editor and just weeping, but trying to be brave. It's like she'd be dabbing her eyes. The editor couldn't see what was happening, but I could see it.
Wow.
And I think that, for sure, that really stuck with me. There have been times when I've had editors that have been very difficult. One editor was very mean to me and would write things in the margins like, what kind of an odious person would write a sentence like this? And I'm reading that and it's like, well, the answer is me.
This kind of odious person.
This kind of, and that kind of, there's no reason for that, for an editor to ever write something like that, but they can, and they do. And sometimes. And so I never would have had the strength to get through the editing of that particular book if I hadn't watched everything that my mother had gone through over the years. She really gave me such strength to deal with, I think, the more business side of writing and publishing.
Amazing. Lisa, I feel like we're only scratching the surface, but
we'll have to do it another time.
We'll have to keep it going in person in LA, in the store.
Yes, in the store. When you come out, you have to let me know and I'll come on down.
Perfect.
And visit you. I'd love that.
Me too. I would love that. Thank you so much. And, just all your insight and all of it and the writing and the research, it's really inspiring. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Of course. My pleasure. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.